The day I walked into that courtroom, my daughter Sarah exchanged a mocking glance with her husband, as if I were just some bothersome old lady. But when the judge looked up from his documents, the world seemed to stop. "Mrs. Eleanor?" he murmured, his eyes wide with recognition. "Is that really you?" The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence, as my daughter and her arrogant husband exchanged panicked glances. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Eleanor Bennett and I'm 72 years old. Until 8 months ago, I was simply a grandmother like any other in my small town outside of Boston. Every morning I'd wake up at 6, brew my coffee in the ceramic mug that my late husband, Robert, had given me on our 30th anniversary, and water my roses while watching the sunrise from my kitchen window. It was a simple life, but filled with small joys that kept alive the memories of a past I treasured in my heart. For almost 50 years, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for her only daughter, Sarah. I worked cleaning houses during the day, sewing at night, and selling homemade pies at the local farmers market on weekends. All so Sarah could attend good schools and have the life I never had. When she married Michael, a man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them, I swallowed my discomfort and welcomed them for Sunday dinners with my best dishes and a smile that hid my concerns. After Robert's death 4 years ago, I had hoped Sarah and I would grow closer. How wrong I was! Instead of finding comfort in each other, she began to see me as a burden. Her visits became mechanical, her calls increasingly rare. The way she looked at the house where I raised her, where she took her first steps, where we celebrated all her achievements, changed completely. It was no longer a home filled with memories, but a piece of real estate to be acquired. The greatest disappointment of my life happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. I had prepared a pot roast, Sarah's favorite recipe from her childhood. I set the table with the embroidered tablecloth I had made when she entered college, and even bought a bouquet of fresh flowers for the occasion. When they arrived, Michael walked in without knocking, as if he already owned the place. He flopped down in the armchair that had belonged to my Robert and turned on the television without even greeting me. Sarah was carrying a folder of documents, and had that distant look she had developed in recent years, a look that belonged to a stranger, not to the little girl who once held my hand with such trust. "Mom, we need to talk," she said with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. She sat on the edge of the sofa, as if she didn't want to stay long. "Michael and I have decided that this house is too big for you. You can't maintain it by yourself anymore." I felt my heart constrict as she continued. "We've found a great assisted living facility for people your age. You'll have company, activities, medical assistance." "But Sarah, this is our home," I replied, noticing how my voice faltered. "Everything we built is here, all our memories." Michael interrupted without taking his eyes off the TV. "Memories are in your head, Mrs. Bennett, not in the walls. You'll like the facility. It's modern, has gardens." What he didn't say, but his calculating eyes revealed, was that they wanted my house. The home that Robert and I had built with so much effort over decades, where we kept not just memories, but a part of our souls. Sarah put the folder on the table. "We've already taken care of all the paperwork. You just need to sign." Her voice sounded mechanical, as if she were talking about any ordinary contract, not about uprooting her own mother from the only place I had left in the world. When I refused to sign, the atmosphere quickly changed. Michael turned off the TV and confronted me with a coldness he had never shown so openly before. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, adjusting the expensive tie he wore, "you need to be reasonable. You can't continue living alone. Last week you left the stove on. It's dangerous." That was an outright lie. I had never left the stove on in my entire life, but I realized at that moment they were willing to invent anything to get what they wanted. In the days that followed, they intensified the pressure. They brought real estate agents without warning me, strangers who measured my rooms and talked about remodeling potential as if I weren't even there. Sarah began packing my things without permission, deciding on her own what I would need to take and what could be discarded or sold. "This dress is so old, Mom," she said, holding the blue dress I wore to Robert's funeral. You won't need it at the facility. Every object she discarded felt like she was tearing away a piece of my history. Old photographs, the love letters Robert had written me, the books we read together on winter nights. All of that, to Sarah and Michael, was just clutter taking up space in the house they already considered theirs. The last straw came when Sarah found my jewelry box. It was a small carved wooden box that Robert had given me on our first wedding anniversary. Inside, besides some pieces of sentimental value, was the pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. "I'll keep this safe," she said, putting the box in her purse. "These things might disappear at the facility." At that moment, I saw something in my daughter's eyes that I had never noticed before: greed. Pure and simple greed, disguised as filial concern. And for the first time in my life, I felt a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. That night, alone in my bedroom, while I listened to Sarah and Michael talking in hushed voices in the living room about how to solve the problem I had become, I cried as I hadn't since Robert's death. But they weren't just tears of sadness, they were tears of indignation, of rebellion against the injustice of being treated like a disposable object after a lifetime of dedication. It was then that I made a decision. I would not leave without a fight. I would not allow them to erase my existence, to reduce me to an inconvenience to be solved. With that newfound determination, I dried my tears and began to think about how I could defend myself from those who should have been protecting me. What I didn't know was that I would soon discover a secret that would completely change the balance of power in that house. A secret that my dear Robert had kept to protect me, precisely from a moment like this. The next morning, Sarah arrived early, with more boxes and renewed determination. "Today, we're going to organize Dad's study," she announced, heading toward the room I had kept untouched since Robert passed away. "No," I responded with a firmness that surprised her. "That place isn't ready to be touched yet." "Mom, it's been 4 years," she replied impatiently. "We can't keep a shrine forever. The house needs to be prepared for sale." I realized at that moment that no matter what I said, they had already decided my future. The house would be sold with or without my consent. They would find a way to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. When Sarah went out to get more boxes from the car, I entered the study and locked the door behind me. This was the last refuge of my husband's memories, where his scent still lingered in the air, where his things remained exactly as he had left them. I ran my fingers over the books on the shelf, over the meticulously organized papers and folders, over the frame with our wedding photo. It was then that I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. On the last shelf of the bookcase, hidden behind a row of old encyclopedias, was a small wall safe. In 48 years of marriage, I never knew of its existence. My hands trembled as I tried to imagine the combination. I tried our wedding date, Robert's birthday, Sarah's birth. Nothing worked. Finally, on an impulse, I tried the date we met, that rainy Sunday afternoon, when we took shelter under the same awning of a bakery. To my surprise, the safe opened. Inside was a leather folder with Robert's initials embossed in gold. When I opened it, I found documents that left me breathless. Property deeds, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, stock certificates in renowned companies, insurance policies with values that made my head spin. And amid it all, a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer with you, and you've found what I saved to protect your future. Forgive me for keeping our true financial resources a secret all these years. It wasn't for lack of trust, but for caution. I always distrusted Michael's intentions. There was something about him that worried me from the beginning, an excessive ambition that made me fear what might happen when I was no longer here to protect you. That's why I quietly built the safety net, investing every extra penny we managed to save. Everything documented in this folder belongs exclusively to you. Sarah will only be entitled to a small portion if, and only if, She takes care of you with the same love and dedication you always had for her. Otherwise, you have all the power to protect yourself. Use this power wisely, my love. Not for vengeance, but to ensure the respect you deserve. Deep down, Sarah is a good person, just easily influenced, but if you need to defend yourself, now you have the means to do so. With all my love for all eternity, Robert. Tears were streaming down my face as I absorbed every word. My Robert, always so quiet and discreet, had built an empire in silence to protect me. While I believed we were living modestly, he was investing in properties, stocks, and businesses that were now worth a fortune. Among the documents, I found something that left me speechless. The deed to the building where Sarah and Michael lived. The luxury apartment they were so proud of, which they flaunted as a symbol of their success, actually belonged to me. They paid rent to a management company that deposited the money directly into an account in my name, an account I didn't even know existed. And there was more. Robert owned shares in the company where Michael worked. Not minor shares, but a significant stake, enough to influence important decisions, even regarding the future of employees like my son-in-law. Sitting on the floor of the study, surrounded by papers that represented more money than I had ever imagined owning, I laughed through my tears. Sarah and Michael thought they were kicking me out of my house to take it for themselves, with no idea that this house was the least of my properties. The insistent knocking on the door brought me back to reality. "Mom, open this door right now," Sarah shouted. I quickly put the most important documents in my purse and returned the rest to the safe, carefully closing it. When I opened the door, Sarah looked at me with irritation. "What are you doing locked in here?" "Just saying goodbye," I replied with a calmness that disconcerted her. "You're right, Sarah. Maybe it is time to move on." She studied me suspiciously, but then her face softened, believing I had finally given in. "I'm glad you understand, Mom. You'll see it's the best for everyone." "Yes," I agreed, firmly holding my purse where I kept the documents that would change everything. "I'm sure each of us will get exactly what we deserve." That night, while Sarah and Michael celebrated their apparent victory with a bottle of expensive wine in the living room, I made a call to a number I found among Robert's contacts. Attorney Jennifer Davis. "Miss Davis. My name is Eleanor Bennett, widow of Robert Bennett. I need your help with some urgent matters related to my inheritance." When I hung up the phone, I looked at Robert's photograph on the bedside table and smiled. "You always knew, didn't you, my old man? You always knew this day would come." For the first time in months, I slept deeply, not with the resignation of someone who has been defeated, but with the tranquility of someone who has finally found their strength. Jennifer Davis was exactly as Robert had described her in his notes. A middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes that missed no detail. When I entered her office 3 days later, she had already analyzed copies of the documents I had emailed her and prepared a preliminary strategy. "Mrs. Bennett," she said after offering me coffee, "your husband was extremely meticulous. All the documents are in order, the investments were made legally, and the will is absolutely incontestable. You are, without a doubt, a very wealthy woman." Those words sounded strange to me, who had always lived counting pennies to make ends meet. But the lawyer continued, showing me a detailed report of all my assets. "What's most interesting," she observed, "is that your husband structured everything so that your daughter and son-in-law cannot contest it. The behavior clause in the will is particularly ingenious. They would only be entitled to a portion of the assets if they cared for you with love and respect. Considering what you've told me about their attempts to remove you from your own home, we can easily argue that clause has been violated." "What should I do now?" I asked, still trying to grasp the magnitude of the situation. Jennifer leaned forward with a determined gleam in her eyes. "First, don't sign absolutely anything they put in front of you. Second, I need you to maintain the appearance that you haven't discovered anything yet. The more they expose themselves, the better for our case. And as for the house, let them think they've won for now. Pretend you're considering moving to the facility. Ask to visit the place. Question the costs. The more their true intentions are revealed, the more ammunition we'll have. In the weeks that followed, I followed Jennifer's instructions to the letter. I allowed Sarah and Michael to continue with their plans, feigning resignation, while secretly documenting every conversation, every veiled threat, every attempt to belittle me, or make me seem incapable. Michael even brought a doctor friend to evaluate my mental condition, a man who barely examined me before suggesting I might be developing dementia. I recorded the entire fraudulent consultation on my phone, following Jennifer's instructions. Sarah, for her part, intensified her efforts to empty the house. Box after box of my memories were packed, labeled, and sent for donation, or simply discarded. It hurt to see my memories being treated with such contempt, but I remained firm, knowing that each of their acts only strengthened my case. One afternoon, while Sarah was cataloging my belongings in the living room, I casually let slip some information. "You know, Sarah, I was thinking of giving you my mother's pearl necklace before I go to the facility. It was your grandmother's after all." She stopped what she was doing, visibly interested. "The pearl necklace, the one you kept in the wooden box." "Yes, but I can't find it. Have you seen it anywhere?" Sarah blushed slightly. "No, I don't know what you're talking about." "That's strange," I continued innocently. "I also can't find the sapphire earrings your father gave me on our 40th anniversary. I hope they haven't been lost in the move." I saw the discomfort in her eyes, the momentary guilt that was quickly replaced by a poorly crafted excuse about having put my jewelry in a safe place. Later, I reported that conversation to Jennifer, who smiled with satisfaction. "Perfect. We're building a solid case of elder financial abuse." The decisive moment came when, following Jennifer's advice, I asked to visit the facility before making my final decision. Sarah and Michael took me on a Sunday, showing me a place that seemed more like a warehouse for the elderly than the paradise they had promised. Tiny rooms, overworked staff, and a smell of disinfectant that barely masked the odor of urine in the air. "Isn't it wonderful, Mom?" Sarah asked with forced enthusiasm. "Look, it even has a community TV room." I looked at the depressing room where half a dozen elderly people were staring blankly at an old television set, and felt my stomach turn. "How much does this place cost?" I asked. Michael promptly replied, "Don't worry about that. We'll sell your house, and the money will be more than enough to cover the costs for many years." "And if I live longer than the money lasts?" The silence that followed was answer enough. They hadn't thought about that, or worse, they had thought about it and didn't care. Back home, I remained silent while they animatedly discussed their plans to remodel the house as soon as I was gone. They talked about knocking down walls, modernizing the kitchen, turning my bedroom into a home office for Michael. "And what about Dad's room?" I asked suddenly. Sarah hesitated. "Well, we were thinking of turning it into a guest room or maybe a larger closet." "I see," I replied, looking out the car window to hide the pain in my eyes. That night I called Jennifer and told her, "I'm ready. Let's proceed with the plan." 2 days later, Sarah and Michael showed up with the final papers for the transfer of the house and my placement in the facility. A man in a suit accompanied them. Their lawyer, whom I later discovered, was just a friend of Michael's who worked as a real estate consultant. "Mom, we've brought the documents for you to sign," Sarah announced, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Once you sign here and here, we can finalize your move to the facility. We've already reserved a spot for next week." I looked at the papers calmly, pretending to study them while I heard the doorbell ring. "Who could that be?" Michael asked, irritated by the interruption. "Must be my friend Barbara," I replied innocently. "I asked her to come help me with some things." When Michael opened the door, it wasn't Barbara who entered, but Jennifer Davis, accompanied by a court officer and a social worker. "Good afternoon," she said with a professional smile. "I'm attorney Jennifer Davis, representing Mrs. Eleanor Bennett. We're here for an official visit related to a complaint of attempted fraud and elder abuse." The color drained from Sarah's face, while Michael tried to maintain his composure. "There must be some mistake," he said, extending his hand, which Jennifer completely ignored. We're just helping my mother-in-law move to a place more suitable for her age. Interesting, Jennifer replied, pointing to the papers on the table. Then I can assume these documents were reviewed by an independent attorney representing Mrs. Bennet's interests. The silence was deafening. I would also like to inform you, Jennifer continued, that we have reason to believe jewelry and valuables belonging to Mrs. Bennet were removed from this residence without her authorization. The court officer has a warrant to verify those items. It was then that I saw something I'll never forget. The exact moment when my daughter realized her plan was crumbling. Her eyes widened in panic, then narrowed with anger, and finally filled with tears when the realization hit her. "Mom," she whispered, "what have you done?" I rose slowly, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "What have I done, Sarah?" I defended myself, just as your father knew I would one day need to. The court officer and social worker began documenting the state of the house, photographing the stacked boxes, the partially emptied rooms, the unsigned transfer papers on the table. Jennifer remained by my side, a calm and authoritative presence that exuded confidence. "Mrs. Bennet," the social worker said, "do you feel coerced to leave your residence against your will?" "Yes," I responded firmly. "My daughter and son-in-law have pressured me for months, even threatening to declare me mentally incompetent if I didn't agree to go to a nursing home." Sarah stepped forward indignantly. "This is absurd. We're just trying to take care of her. She's confused. She's forgotten things, left the stove on." "Interesting," Jennifer interrupted, pulling a small device from her bag. "I have recordings from the past 2 months that contradict that claim, including a conversation where Mr. Michael admits to having invented the stove incident to convince Mrs. Sarah that her mother could no longer live alone." Michael turned pale. "That's illegal. You can't record people without consent." "Actually," Jennifer smiled, "Mrs. Bennet recorded conversations in her own home, where she has every right to protect her interests. Additionally, we have recent medical reports attesting to her full mental capacity, conducted by independent professionals, not by doctor friends brought in by you, sir." The court officer continued his methodical work while Sarah collapsed into a chair, openly crying. "Why are you doing this to us, Mom? We're your family." "Family?" I repeated, feeling a mix of sadness and indignation. "Was it as family that you packed away my memories as if they were trash? Was it as family that you took your grandmother's jewelry without permission? Was it as family that you and Michael planned to abandon me in a second-rate nursing home to take my house?" "It's not like that," she sobbed. "Michael convinced me it was best for you. He said you were losing your memory, that it was dangerous for you to live alone." "And you believed him instead of trusting your own mother?" I asked, feeling my heart break again. "Do you know me so little?" Michael, realizing the situation was out of control, tried to regain authority. "This is a misunderstanding that we can resolve as a family. We don't need lawyers or court officers. Mrs. Bennet, we always wanted what was best for you." "The best?" Jennifer intervened. "Like the attempts to transfer the house to Mrs. Sarah's name even before Mrs. Bennet's move to the facility. Or the unauthorized withdrawals from Mrs. Bennet's bank account in recent months." Sarah's eyes widened. "I don't know what she's talking about." "Mom, I swear I didn't take your money." "No, you didn't take it," I replied calmly. "But Michael did. I have bank statements showing transfers made with my card to a joint account of yours on dates when I wasn't even at home." Michael adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," I continued, feeling a strange calm as I unveiled the truth. "Just as there's no mistake that you thought I was a poor, defenseless old lady, easy to manipulate and discard. But there's something you don't know." I walked slowly to my purse and took out a folder of documents that Jennifer had prepared for me. "Your father, Sarah, wasn't just the modest accountant you knew. He quietly built a financial empire over the years." I placed on the table property deeds, stock certificates, bank statements, with values that made Michael's eyes widen with incredulity and greed. "This building on Beacon Street," I pointed to one of the deeds, "is mine. As is the beachfront property you visited last summer believing it belonged to your boss, Michael." Sarah took the papers with trembling hands. This can't be true. It is true, Jennifer confirmed. And there's more. The apartment where you live also belongs to Mrs. Bennet. You pay rent to a management company that deposits the money directly into an account in her name. Michael staggered as if he'd been punched. This is impossible. And those shares in the company where you work, Michael, the ones purchased by an anonymous investor 5 years ago that guaranteed your promotion, they're also mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Sarah looked at me as if she were seeing a ghost. Why did Dad never tell us? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. Because he didn't trust Michael's intentions. And it seems he was right to be cautious. Michael attempted one last desperate maneuver. Mrs. Bennet, we can work this out. Obviously, there was a misunderstanding. We didn't know about these resources. We were just concerned for your safety. If you have so much means, we can find a better place, more luxurious. I'm not interested in any better place, I replied firmly. This is my home and this is where I'm going to stay. And what about our apartment? Sarah asked with tears streaming down her face. Are you going to evict us? That depends, I replied, feeling a mixture of pain and determination, on how much you're willing to learn about respect, dignity, and true love. Jennifer then took the floor. Meanwhile, she continued, I have here a temporary restraining order preventing either of you from removing more items from this house, or attempting to transfer its ownership. We also request the immediate return of all property already removed, especially family jewelry and personal documents. Sarah broke down in sobs while Michael remained paralyzed, as if trying to process all the information he had just received. The court officer continued his work, methodically photographing each room, each document, each piece of evidence of what had happened in that house. I suggest, said Jennifer, with a firm voice, that you two leave now and think very carefully about your next steps. We are prepared to take this case forward with all its legal consequences, unless we reach an agreement that fully respects Mrs. Bennet's rights and wishes. Michael finally recovered his voice, but he was no longer the arrogant man I knew. There was fear in his eyes. How much? How much is all this worth? He asked, gesturing toward the documents. Jennifer smiled coldly. Much more than you could ever pay in a lifetime of work, Mr. Michael. Now I suggest you leave. When the door closed behind them, I felt my legs weaken. Jennifer helped me to the sofa, where I collapsed, emotionally exhausted. You were very brave, she said, sitting beside me. Not everyone would have the strength to face their own family like that. I don't know if it was courage or desperation, I confessed, watching the social worker still taking notes. I never wanted it to come to this. Unfortunately, it's often those we love most who hurt us the most, Jennifer replied. But now you're in control. What do you want to do next? I looked around the living room at the walls that had witnessed so many moments of my life, at the empty spaces where photographs and memories had once been. I want to get my things back, I replied firmly. And then I want Sarah to understand exactly what she did. Not out of revenge, but because she needs to learn. In the days that followed, I received desperate calls from Sarah. At first, I ignored them all, following Jennifer's advice to maintain distance until the legal aspects were resolved. Michael, on the other hand, disappeared completely. I heard he had taken leave from work and traveled to resolve personal matters. A week after the confrontation, Jennifer brought me news. We've received a settlement proposal, she said, handing me a folder. Your son-in-law is willing to return all your possessions, publicly acknowledge that you are in full possession of your mental faculties, and renounce any claim to your house or assets. And what does he want in exchange? I asked, knowing Michael's character too well to believe in sincere repentance. That you don't use your influence as a shareholder to harm him at the company, and that you don't evict him from the apartment immediately. He's asking for 6 months to find another place. I considered the proposal for a moment. And Sarah, what does she say about this? Jennifer hesitated. Your daughter didn't participate in this negotiation. From what I understand, there are tensions in the marriage after the revelation. That didn't surprise me. Michael had always been the type of man who abandons ship when it starts to sink. Now that he knew he wouldn't get my fortune, he was probably already blaming Sarah for the failure of the plan. Tell Michael I accept his conditions with one stipulation, I replied, after thinking for a moment. If he wants to stay in the apartment for 6 months, he'll have to increase the rent by 50%. After all, now he knows who the real owner is. Jennifer smiled. It will be my pleasure to convey your message. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visit. Sarah was at my door, alone, with deep circles under her eyes, and a face marked by sleepless nights. May I come in? She asked timidly. So different from the arrogant woman who had tried to throw me out of my own house. I opened the door in silence and let her in. She was carrying 2 large boxes, which she carefully placed on the living room table. Your jewelry, she said, her voice breaking. It's all there, and your photo albums, Dad's letters, everything I took. I opened the first box, and there they were, intact, the treasures of my life. My mother's pearl necklace, the earrings Robert had given me, the engagement ring with the small sapphire he had saved for a year to buy. Michael and I have separated, Sarah abruptly said, breaking the silence. He blamed me for everything. Said I should have noticed that Dad would never have lived so modestly if he didn't have something hidden. I didn't respond, just continued checking the contents of the boxes, making sure everything was there. Mom, she continued with a trembling voice, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What we did, what I allowed to be done, is unforgivable, but I need you to know that I really believed I was doing the right thing. Finally, I looked up at her. The right thing was to force me out of my home, throw away my memories like garbage, treat me like a senile child. No, she admitted, tears flowing freely. Michael convinced me you were deteriorating, that it was dangerous for you to live alone. He made up stories about you forgetting things, leaving the stove on, and I believed him instead of trusting my own mother. Why, Sarah? I asked, feeling the weight of decades of seemingly wasted love. After everything I did for you, after all the sacrifices, how could you believe I deserved to be treated that way? She sat on the sofa, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Because it was easier, she finally confessed. It was easier to believe you needed help than to admit I had married a man who only cared about money and status. It was easier to pretend we were taking care of you than to face the truth about what we had become. Her face contorted with genuine shame. When Michael first suggested selling the house, I said no. Then he started planting doubts in my mind. Little seeds of worry about your mental health, your ability to live alone. And I let those seeds grow. Because, deep down, I wanted the house. I wanted to transform it, modernize it, erase the marks of the past that made me feel guilty for not being the daughter I should have been. Her words hit me like a revelation. It wasn't just greed. It was guilt. It was the desire to erase the evidence of everything I had done for her, everything she couldn't repay. And now, what do you want from me, Sarah? She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, as she used to do when she was a child. Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I just came to return what's yours, and to say that, even if you never forgive me, I know what I did, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person. I looked at my daughter, for despite everything, she was still my daughter, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Not the calculated manipulation that Michael had perfected, nor the false concern she had exhibited in recent months, but genuine vulnerability. Where are you living? I asked. With a friend for now. I'm looking for a small apartment I can afford on my salary. I nodded, absorbing the information. And the apartment? Michael's still there, she replied. He kept almost everything in the separation agreement. Said it was the least I could do after ruining our plans. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Michael remained Michael to the end. Sarah, I said finally, I can't promise things will go back to the way they were. You broke something deep between us, and it will take time, if it happens at all, to rebuild that trust. She nodded, accepting my words without protest. But, I continued, your father believed that deep down you were still the girl he raised. He believed you could find your way back to the person you should be. Dad was always better at seeing the good in people than I was, she murmured. Yes, I agreed. And maybe I need to learn to have a little more of that faith. I didn't forgive her that day. I didn't invite her back home, nor did I promise to forget what had happened. But when she stood to leave, I didn't stop her from hugging me briefly, a timid and uncertain contact that contained as much regret as hope. After she left, I sat alone with my recovered jewelry and the pain of a betrayal that was still very fresh. But for the first time in months, I also felt something different, not just the satisfaction of having defended myself, but the possibility, however remote, of healing. 2 weeks after Sarah's visit, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer. Mrs. Bennet, a situation has arisen that you should know about. Michael hasn't paid the increased rent, as per our agreement, and from what I've learned, he's planning to leave the country. Leave the country? Where to? Apparently, he has a cousin in Canada. My sources at his company indicate he's resigned and is already selling his belongings. That didn't surprise me. Michael had always been the type to flee when things got difficult. What surprised me was what Jennifer said next. There's something else. Sarah came to me yesterday, seeking legal help. She's discovered that Michael emptied their joint accounts before the separation and left her with various debts in her name. I felt a pang in my chest. Despite everything, it was my daughter who was suffering. What does she intend to do? We're filing for an injunction to prevent him from leaving the country without settling his debts. But honestly, I believe he's already transferred the money abroad. Sarah is practically bankrupt, in addition to being in debt. After hanging up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the garden where Sarah used to play as a child. I remembered Robert's letter, his words about using power not to hurt, but to protect and teach. The next day, I asked Jennifer to prepare some documents and called Sarah. We need to talk, I said simply. She arrived promptly, dressed in simple clothes I had never seen her wear before. The glamour of an executive's wife had completely disappeared. Jennifer told me about Michael, I began, as soon as we sat down. About the debts, the money, everything. Sarah nodded resignedly. He planned all this months ago. While we were pretending to be concerned about you, he was already preparing his escape. I was so stupid, Mom. So blind. Many intelligent women are deceived by men like Michael, I replied. Don't blame yourself for that. Blame yourself for what you did to me, not for what he did to you. She lowered her eyes, accepting the harsh truth in my words. I have a proposal for you, I continued, sliding a folder across the table. It's not charity or automatic forgiveness, it's an opportunity. Sarah opened the folder dubiously, and her eyes widened as she read the contents. This is a job contract? Yes, for the Robert Bennett Foundation, an organization I'm creating to help elderly victims of family abuse and abandonment. The idea had been born during my sleepless nights, when I realized that my story wasn't unique. How many other elderly people were being manipulated by greedy relatives? How many were being forced to leave their homes, to give up their lives, without having the luck I had of a cautious husband? You want me to work for you? Sarah asked, confused. I want you to work for the foundation. Your knowledge of administration will be useful. The salary is modest but fair, and there's a housing clause. You can occupy the small apartment at the back of this house, which will save you rent while you reorganize your life. Why, she whispered. Why would you do this for me after everything? I stood up and walked to the window, watching my garden blooming under the afternoon sun. I'm not doing this for you, Sarah. I'm doing it for the woman you can become, for the daughter your father believed you still were, deep down. And I'm doing it for all the elderly who weren't as lucky as I was, who have no way to defend themselves. I turned to face her. Your work will be hard, and often painful. You'll hear stories that will remind you of what you yourself tried to do to me. You'll have to look into the eyes of people who were betrayed by those who should have loved them. And maybe through that work, you'll truly understand what you tried to do. Sarah held the contract with trembling hands. I don't know if I deserve this opportunity. You probably don't, I replied honestly. But your father always said that forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's something that's offered. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, but I'm willing to offer a path. In the months that followed, I transformed my pain into purpose. With Jennifer's help, I created the Robert Bennett Foundation, using part of the fortune my husband had accumulated to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. We purchased a large house near mine and transformed it into a legal and emotional support center for vulnerable elderly people. Sarah, true to her word, worked tirelessly. At first, the other foundation employees treated her with distrust. They all knew our story, which I never tried to hide, but over time her genuine dedication began to earn respect. The path to redemption wasn't easy for her. There were days when she came home, for the small apartment at the back of my house had become her home, with eyes red from crying after hearing particularly painful stories of abandoned or exploited elderly people. How can you look at me every day knowing what I tried to do to you? She asked me one night when we met in the shared kitchen. Because I see you're trying to change, I replied simply. And because your father believed you could be better. Michael never returned. We learned through foundation contacts that he had settled in Canada and was already involved with another woman, a wealthy widow by coincidence or pattern. Part of me wondered if I should warn her, but another part knew that some predators are only stopped when they encounter prey that bites back. A year after the foundation's creation, I received an honor I never expected, a Human Rights Award for our work with vulnerable elderly people. On the day of the ceremony, as I prepared to give my speech, I looked out at the audience and saw Sarah in the front row, applauding with tears in her eyes. That night, after the ceremony, as we walked through my garden, our garden, as I was beginning to think of it, Sarah handed me a small package. What's this? I asked. Open it, she replied nervously. Inside was a handmade artisan book. On its pages, Sarah had pasted old photographs of our family. Many of the same photos she had so carelessly packed away a year before. But now each one came with a handwritten letter, remembering the moment captured and reflecting on the meaning of those memories. I spent months searching for these photos, she explained. Some were with Michael, others with friends I'd given them to without thinking. I wanted to gather our memories again, not to erase them, but to honor them. I leafed through the book carefully, feeling the weight of decades of family history in my hands. On the last page was a recent photo of the foundation, with the entire team gathered in front of the building, and below it, a simple inscription, "To my mother, who taught me it's never too late to start over, and to my father, who always knew I would find my way back." That night, for the first time in over a year, I hugged my daughter without reservation. It wasn't complete forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that we were both changing, growing, learning to be a family again, this time based on mutual respect instead of obligation. As we gazed at the stars from our shared garden, I thought of Robert and how he had planned all this. Not just the financial protection, but also the possibility of redemption. He knew our daughter better than either of us. He knew she might lose her way, but he also believed she could find her way back to the light. And as the stars shone above us, I felt he had been right. 18 months after the foundation's creation, I received news that would change everything again. One of the volunteer attorneys working with us sought me out with a grave expression. "Mrs. Bennett, we found something you should see," he said, handing me a folder. During our investigation for Mrs. Johnson's case, we discovered that the same scheme was used against several other elderly women. And guess who's behind it all? I opened the folder and felt my blood freeze. There was Michael, using another name, but unmistakable in the surveillance photographs. He had secretly returned to the United States and was operating a sophisticated scheme to deceive elderly widows, getting them to sign documents that transferred their properties to shell companies. "He's back," I murmured. "And he's doing the same thing to other women." The lawyer nodded grimly. "We've already informed the authorities, but we need someone who knows him to make a formal identification, someone who can testify about his methods and personality." That night, I discussed the discovery with Sarah. She paled when she saw the photographs and documents. "He hasn't changed at all," she said bitterly. "He's just found new victims." "The authorities want us to testify against him," I explained. "I've already decided I will, but you don't need to get involved if you don't want to." Sarah looked at me with a determination that reminded me of myself. "No, Mom. I need to do this. I need to face him, not just for us, but for all those women." In the weeks that followed, we worked with the police and the district attorney's office, providing detailed testimonies about Michael's methods, the subtle manipulations, the small lies that gradually escalated to complete fraud. Sarah, in particular, was crucial in explaining how he had convinced her to participate in the plan against me, how he planted doubts and insecurities, how he gradually isolated his victims. When the day of the trial finally arrived, I felt an anxiety I hadn't experienced since the confrontation in my house. The courtroom was full. Our case had received media attention, partly due to the Foundation's work, which was now nationally known for its fight against financial abuse of the elderly. When I entered the courtroom with Sarah by my side, I felt all eyes turned toward us. Michael's most recent victims sat together, women between the ages of 65 and 85, all with stories painfully similar to mine. Michael was brought in handcuffed, wearing a worn suit that contrasted with the elegance he had always displayed. When his eyes met mine, I saw a flash of anger quickly replaced by that mask of calculated charm I knew so well. The decisive moment came when the judge entered the room. My heart almost stopped when I recognized him. "Judge William Thompson," the bailiff announced. He was the young lawyer who had worked as an intern at the courthouse decades ago, when I was a clerk there. The same shy man I had encouraged when everyone else treated him with disdain. The young man to whom I brought coffee on nights, when he worked late studying for his bar exam. He didn't recognize me immediately, busy with the initial proceedings. But when it was my turn to testify and I said my name, I saw his eyes lift from his papers with an expression of surprise and recognition. "Mrs. Bennet?" he asked, adjusting his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Eleanor Bennet from the county court clerk's office." "Yes, Your Honor," I replied with a small smile. "It's been a long time." The judge smiled briefly before resuming his professional expression. "Indeed it has. Please continue with your testimony." For the next 2 hours, I narrated in detail everything Michael had done, how he had manipulated my daughter, how he had tried to strip me of my home and dignity, how he had planned to abandon me in a substandard nursing home. I spoke about discovering the fortune my husband had left, and how that had thwarted his plans. "And now," I concluded, "he's doing the same thing to other women who weren't as lucky as I was to have a cautious husband." When I finished, Michael's attorney rose for cross-examination, trying to paint me as a confused old lady who had imagined persecution where there was only family concern. "Mrs. Bennet," she asked with false sympathy, "isn't it true that you were having memory lapses at that time? That you sometimes forgot where you put things? Left the stove on?" "No," I replied firmly. "I never had such problems. Your client invented those stories to convince my daughter that I needed to be institutionalized." "And how can you be so certain of that, if you had memory problems?" she insisted with a condescending smile. "Objection, Your Honor," the prosecutor intervened. "Argumentative. Sustained," replied Judge Thompson. "Counselor, rephrase your question." But before she could do so, I asked permission to respond. The counselor asks how I can be certain. "I can be certain because I have complete medical reports conducted after my son-in-law's attempt to declare me incompetent. I can be certain because I have recordings of him admitting he invented those incidents. And I can be certain because at 72 years of age, I can still remember the first day the now Judge William Thompson entered the courthouse as an intern. wearing a navy blue suit that was too big in the shoulders, carrying a synthetic leather folder he had received from his mother as a graduation gift. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Thompson looked at me with a mixture of surprise and emotion. I remember every detail of that day, just as I remember every detail of the day my son-in-law and my daughter tried to convince me that I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. My memory, counselor, is perfectly intact. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the judge's pen, scribbling something on his notepad. Sarah testified next, with a courage that filled me with pride. She spoke openly about how she had been manipulated, about her own guilt and repentance, about the path of redemption she had found through work at the foundation. Michael convinced me that my mother was losing her mental capacity, she explained. Her voice choked with emotion. He started with small suggestions. Did you notice how your mother forgot that actor's name? Did you see how she confused the dates? Until I began to see problems where none existed. When Michael finally testified, it was like watching an actor on stage. He denied all accusations. He portrayed himself as a concerned son-in-law, who only wanted the best for his mother-in-law. He even shed fake tears as he spoke about how hurt he was by the accusations. But then the prosecutor presented the evidence. Recordings, falsified documents, testimonies from all the other victims whose stories were almost identical to mine. And finally, bank records showing how he had diverted money from all of them. At the end of the 3-day trial, Judge William Thompson delivered his sentence. Michael Reynolds, this court finds you guilty of all charges of fraud, forgery, coercion, and abuse against vulnerable individuals. The defendant exploited the trust of family members and women, who in their golden years deserved protection and respect, not manipulation and theft. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Michael. Particularly disturbing to this court is the coldness with which the defendant planned and executed his crimes, specifically targeting people he considered weak and incapable of defending themselves. He paused, then continued with a voice that combined authority and contained emotion. For these crimes, I sentence Mr. Reynolds to 12 years in prison, in addition to full restitution to the victims and a fine proportional to the damage caused. As Michael was led out of the courtroom, Judge Thompson looked at me and gave me a small gesture of recognition that few noticed, but which meant everything to me. A reminder that small kindnesses, like encouraging an insecure young intern decades ago, can return when least expected. As we left the courthouse, we were surrounded by reporters and other elderly women who had attended the trial seeking inspiration and hope. A lady of about 80 approached me with tears in her eyes. You gave me courage, she said, taking my hands. After seeing you in the newspaper talking about the foundation, I realized my nephew was doing the same thing to me. Thanks to you, I was able to stop him before it was too late. That night at home, Sarah and I sat in the garden, with a bottle of wine, celebrating not just the victory in court, but also the journey we had traveled together. You know what's most ironic? Sarah said, looking at the stars. If Michael had never tried to take your house, the foundation would never have existed. All those women we're helping now would have nowhere to turn. Your father always said that even in the worst situations, we can find purpose, I replied. I think in the end he was right about that too. Sarah smiled, a smile that finally reached her eyes, reminding me of the girl she had been before Michael entered our lives. He would be proud of you, Mom, of everything you've built from the pain. Of us both, I gently corrected. He always knew you would find your way back. We gazed at the starry sky in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. The foundation had become more than just work for us. It was a shared mission, a purpose that reconnected us in a way I never imagined possible after all we had been through. What happened today in court, Sarah finally said. When the judge recognized you, it was like watching destiny unfold, as if all the pieces finally fit together. Life is like that, I replied. Sometimes the kindnesses we offer return when we need them most. I never imagined that shy young intern would one day become the judge who sentenced Michael. You've always been like that, haven't you? Always helping others without expecting anything in return. I smiled, remembering all the small gestures throughout my life that I never considered extraordinary. Bringing coffee to interns who worked late, standing up for younger employees against tyrannical bosses, offering a friendly shoulder to colleagues in difficulty. It's just how I was raised, I replied. Your grandmother always said that kindness is the only investment that never fails. Sarah raised her glass. To justice and kindness that always returns. 5 years passed since Michael's trial. The Robert Bennett Foundation became a national reference in defending the rights of the elderly. What began as a small legal support office expanded to 3 units in different cities, offering not just legal assistance but also psychological support, social activities, and most recently, temporary housing for elderly people in vulnerable situations. On a sunny spring morning, I was sitting in the foundation's garden, watching a group of ladies participating in a Tai Chi class, when Sarah approached with an envelope in her hands. It arrived today, she said, handing me the envelope with the Justice Department seal. I think it's what we've been waiting for. With hands slightly trembling from age. Now at 77, I already felt the weight of the years in my joints. I opened the envelope and read its contents. It's been approved, I announced, feeling a lump in my throat. The Bennett Elder Protection Act for financial and psychological protection of vulnerable elderly persons was signed into law yesterday. Sarah sat beside me, her eyes shining with contained tears. We did it, Mom. We really did it. The bill, the fruit of 3 years of tireless work alongside legislators and elderly rights advocacy organizations, created more robust legal mechanisms to protect people over 65 from financial and psychological abuse, especially those perpetrated by family members. It was the culmination of everything we had learned from our own painful experience, transformed into an instrument that could prevent thousands of other elderly people from suffering the same ordeal. Your father would be so proud, I murmured, carefully putting the letter back in the envelope. Not just of us, but of how his vision allowed us to create something much bigger than ourselves. Sarah took my wrinkled hand in hers. At 55, she had become a strong and compassionate woman, completely different from the manipulated and insecure person who had almost thrown me out of my own home. Her work at the foundation had transformed her, just as it had transformed me. I have something to show you, she said, helping me to my feet. A surprise we're preparing for the foundation's anniversary celebration. We walked together to the new wing of the main building, which had remained closed during the past few weeks of remodeling. Sarah opened the door and led me inside. The walls, once empty, were now covered with photographs, dozens of them carefully framed. They were the faces of elderly people we had helped over the years, each with a small plaque, briefly telling their story. This is the Hall of Stories, Sarah explained. We want everyone who visits the foundation to see the faces and know the stories of the people we help, so they understand that each elderly person isn't just a case, but an entire life of experiences, memories, and dignity. In the center of the main wall was an empty space waiting for a larger portrait. And here, she continued, will go your photograph, Mom, with the story that started it all. I felt my eyes fill with tears. I don't know if I deserve such a prominent place. After all, I was lucky. Many others don't have the protection that Robert left me. That's exactly why your story needs to be told, Sarah insisted. To show that resistance is possible, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, and that even the worst betrayals can eventually lead to something good. We walked slowly down the hallway, stopping to read some of the stories. Mrs. Baker, 82, who recovered her home after her nephew tried to sell it without her consent. Mr. Wilson, 77, who escaped an abusive marriage after decades of psychological manipulation. Carter, 90, who reported her children for misappropriation and now gave lectures on financial independence in old age. All these people, said Sarah, found their voice and their strength because you found yours first. That night, after a tiring but rewarding day, I returned to my home, the same home I had almost lost 5 years before. Sarah now lived in her own small house, near the foundation. But we still dined together regularly, and on Sundays she came for breakfast, reviving a tradition we had lost during the difficult years. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the garden that Robert had loved so much, and that was now more beautiful than ever. The roses bloomed in abundance, cared for by my hands, which, though slower with age, still knew exactly how much water and sun each plant needed. I thought about how my life had completely changed in these last years. From the near tragedy of losing my home and dignity, emerged a purpose I never imagined having. From the betrayal of my only daughter, was born a reconciliation deeper and truer than our previous relationship had ever been. On the table beside my chair was the old jewelry box that Sarah had tried to take, now returned and restored. I opened it and took out my mother's pearl necklace, running my fingers over the smooth, shining beads. Tomorrow I would wear it to the Foundation's anniversary commemoration ceremony, where the Bennett Elder Protection Act would be officially announced. A small envelope at the bottom of the box caught my attention. I opened it and found a handwritten note from Sarah. "Mom, I can never completely erase the pain I caused, but I hope to continue being worthy of the second chance you gave me. Each day at the Foundation reminds me that our work isn't just about laws and rights, but about restoring the dignity that many try to take from our elderly. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to do what's right. With all my love and gratitude, Sarah." I put the note back in the box, feeling a peace that only comes when we finally understand that even the most painful experiences can lead us to places we never imagined reaching. The next morning, as I prepared for the ceremony, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the white hair I now wore with pride, the wrinkles that marked a face that had known both suffering and joy, the eyes that had shed so many tears but now shone with purpose and satisfaction. And I thought about what I would say in my speech, the words I wanted other women my age to hear and take with them. It's never too late to defend yourself. It's never too late to transform pain into purpose. And it's never ever too late to discover your own strength, even when those who should protect you are the same ones trying to bring you down. When I arrived at the Foundation that morning, I was greeted by a crowd of smiling faces, the team we had built, the elderly we had helped, authorities and supporters who believed in our cause, and at the center of it all, Sarah, now executive director of the Foundation, was waiting for me with a warm and sincere embrace. As I took the stage to give my speech, I looked at all those people and felt a deep gratitude for everything. Yes, for everything, even for Michael and Sarah's attempts to take everything from me, because without that darkness, I would never have discovered the light that now illuminated so many other lives. "My name is Eleanor," I began, adjusting the microphone. "I'm 77 years old, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything, only to find a purpose greater than I ever imagined." And as I shared my journey, I saw in the eyes of the audience recognition, hope, and most importantly, the determination that my story would not be unique, that together we were creating a world where the elderly would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. At the end of the speech, as applause echoed through the hall, I looked up at the sky through the high windows and smiled. "Did you see, Robert?" I thought. "You were right about everything."